again, Zeta here. Now as promised, I'll be doing a creepypasta reading, and the first one will be one of the infamous Disney creepypastas along with Ahem Mouse, which is none other than Abandoned by Disney. Probably the one of most popular creepypastas, but even let's see how it holds up for its legacy. Well, without further ado, let's begin. Some of you may have heard that the Disney Corporation is responsible for at least one real ghost town. Disney built the Treasure Island Resort in Baker's Bay, Bahamas. It didn't start out as a ghost town. Disney cruise ships actually stopped at the resort, dropping off tourists to relax in luxury. This is a fact. Look it up yourself. Disney spent $30 million on the place. Yes, $30 million. Then they abandoned him. Disney blamed the shallow waters, too shallow for their ships to operate safely, and even blamed the workers, saying that because they were from the Bahamas they were too lazy to work a regular schedule. That's where the truth of his story ends. It wasn't because of the sand, and it obviously wasn't because foreigners are lazy. Both were convenient excuses. No, I sincerely doubt those reasons were genuine. Why do I doubt the official report so much? Because of Mowgli's Palace. Near the coastal town of Emerald Isle in North Carolina, Disney began construction on Mowgli's Palace in the late 1990s. The concept was a jungle-themed resort with, of course, a giant palace at the center of it all. If you're unfamiliar with the character of Mowgli, it might help to remember the story from The Jungle Book. If you haven't seen it anywhere else, you might know it from a Disney cartoon from decades past. Mowgli is an abandoned child, in the jungle, essentially raised by animals and at the same time threatened and persecuted by other animals. Mowgli's Palace was a controversial undertaking from the start. Disney purchased a large amount of expensive land for the project, and there was even a scandal over the purchase of certain properties. The local government expropriated several of the properties, only to later sell them to Disney. Even a house that had barely been completed was expropriated with little or no explanation. The land seized by the government was supposedly for a fictitious highway project. Knowing full well what was going on, people began calling it the Mickey Mouse Highway. Then there was the concept art. A group of Disney executives held a meeting in town. They intended to convince everyone how lucrative this project would be for them all. When they were shown the concept art, this gigantic Indian palace, surrounded by jungle, staffed by men and women in loincloths and tribal gear. Well, suffice it to say, no one liked the idea. We're talking about a grand Indian palace, a jungle, and a loincloth, and located not only in the center of a relatively wealthy area, but also in a somewhat xenophobic part of the southern US. It was a questionable combination at that point in history. A member of the crowd attempted to storm the stage, but was quickly restrained by security guards after breaking one of the performance posters with his knee. Disney took that community and essentially split it in half. The homes were razed, the land was cleared, and there wasn't a damn thing anyone could do or say about it. Local TV and newspapers were initially against the development, but some crazy connection between the Disney Media Group and the local media caused opinions to completely swerve. Just as Disney had spent millions on Treasure Island in the Bahamas and then abandoned it, the same thing happened with Mowgli's Palace. Construction was completed. The resort actually hosted guests. The surrounding communities were flooded with traffic and the usual inconveniences associated with the influx of lost and irate tourists. The map led me through an excessively long outdoor hallway filled with lush vegetation. Out-of-control tropical plants that had invaded the area mingled with the native flora, which was in fact individual to the area and had attempted to reclaim the land. I was amazed when I arrived at the front gates of the complex. Massive, monolithic wooden doors, which looked like they had been cut from giant sequoia trees. The door had been pierced in several places by woodpeckers and eaten away at the base by gnawing insects. Hanging from the door was a sheet of metal, a piece of scrap metal, with black letters scrawled on it. Abandoned by Disney. Clearly the work of a resident or former employee who had wanted to make a small protest. The gates were open wide enough to walk through, but not drive through, so having grabbed my digital camera and the map, the back of which showed a schematic of the complex, I set off. The interior gardens of the place were as overgrown with vegetation as the entrance. There were neglected and tattered palm trees among piles of their own coconuts. Banana trees similarly rose above their own stinking, vermin-infested waste. There was a kind of clash between order and chaos, with carefully planted rows of perennial flowers mixed with repulsive tall grasses and smelly, blackened mushrooms. All that remained of the open-air structures was broken and rotten wood and several charred pieces of unidentifiable material. What had likely been an information booth or an outdoor bar was a mere pile of debris, shattered by vandalism and ravaged by the elements. The most interesting thing in the gardens was a statue of Baloo, the friendly bear from the Jungle Book, which stood in a sort of courtyard in front of the main building. He was frozen in a jovial wave to no one, staring off into empty space with a goofy, toothy grin, with long swathes of his fur covered in bird droppings and vines surrounding his platform. I approached the main building, the palace, only to find its exterior covered in graffiti where the original paint hadn't peeled off. The entrance wasn't just open, the doors had been removed from their hinges and burglarized. Over the doors, or the gaping jaws that had been left in place, someone had painted, "Abandoned by Disney again." I wish I could talk about all the impressive things I saw inside the palace. Forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, a developed secret society of homeless vagrants. But no. The interior of the building was so empty, so bare, that I think people had actually stolen even the mold from the walls. Everything too big to be stolen, counters, desks, giant fake trees, it was all strewn about in the middle of this empty echo chamber that amplified my every step like the slow rat-a-tat of a machine gun. I looked at the building plan and headed towards all the places that seemed to be interesting in some way. The kitchen was just like you'd imagine, an industrial food prep area with all the appliances and space, the cost of which hadn't been a concern. Every glass surface was broken, every door was off its hinges, every metal surface was dented and dinged. The whole place smelled like very old urine. The giant freezer, no longer remotely cold, had rows and rows of empty shelf space. Hooks hung from the ceiling, probably for hanging cuts of meat, and as I stood there for a moment, I realized they were swinging. Each hook swung in a random direction, but its movements were so slow and small that it was almost impossible to see. I assumed it had been caused by my own footsteps, so I stopped one from swinging by grabbing it. I carefully let go, but within seconds it started moving again. The bathrooms were in virtually the same condition as the rest of the place. Like the Treasure Island resort, someone had methodically smashed each porcelain toilet with coconuts and other implements. There was about 1.5 inches of stale, smelly, stagnant water on the floor, so I didn't stay there long. The odd thing is that the toilets and sinks, and the bidets in the women's restroom, yes, I went in there, all dripped, leaked, or just ran freely. It seemed to me like they should have turned off the main water supply a long time ago. There were many rooms in the complex, but naturally, I didn't have time to check every single one. The few I did look into were similarly destroyed, and I didn't expect to find anything there. I thought there was a television or a radio in one room, as I actually thought I heard a faint conversation coming from it. Even though it was like a whisper, probably my own breathing echoing in the silence, or just another case of the sound of running water playing tricks on my mind, that's what it sounded like.
I didn't believe it.
Huh?
I didn't know.
Your father told you so.
I know, it sounds ridiculous. I'm just recounting what I experienced, the reason I thought there might have been a leak or a draft in that room, or worse, homeless people who had taken refuge there and probably stabbed me. Having already returned to the main gate of the palace, I thought that I had not found anything worthwhile and that I had come in vain. Looking out the front door, I saw something rather interesting in the courtyard that I had apparently overlooked. Something that would give me at least anything I could gain from all this work, even if it was just a photograph. There was a very lifelike statue of a python, perhaps 25 meters long, coiled around itself and sunbathing, on a pedestal right in the center of the area. It was almost sunset, so the light fell on the object perfectly for a photograph. I approached the python and took a photo. Then I stood on my toes and took another. I got even closer to capture the detail of its face. Slowly, nonchalantly, the python raised its head, looked me straight in the eye, turned, and slithered off the pedestal, through the grass, and into the trees. She and her 25 meters. Her head disappeared into the forest even before her tail had left the solarium. Disney had released all of its exotic animals on the grounds. Right there on my map was the reptile house. I should have known. I'd read about the sharks on Treasure Island, and I should have known they'd done this. I was dumbfounded, completely astonished. My mouth must have been open for a long time before I came back down to earth and closed it. I blinked a few times and backed away from where the snake had been, back toward the palace. Even though he was definitely gone, I didn't want to take any risks and returned to the building. I took a few deep breaths, slapping myself to come back to myself after that. I looked for a place to sit, since my legs felt like jelly at this point. Of course, there was nowhere to sit unless I wanted to lean on the broken glass and carpets of dead leaves or climb onto a desk of questionable reliability. I had seen some stairs near the palace lobby and decided to go sit there until I felt better. The stairwell was far enough away from the front of the building that it was relatively clean, save for a surprising amount of dust. I tore a piece of metal off the wall, repainted with the "Abandoned by Disney" slogan I'd grown accustomed to. I placed the piece on the stairwell and sat on it to at least keep myself somewhat clean. The staircase led downward, below ground level. Using the camera's flash as a sort of makeshift flashlight, I saw that the steps ended at a wire mesh gate with a padlock. A sign on the gate, a real sign, read, "Characters only." Thank you. This cheered me up a bit, for two reasons. 1. A character-only area would certainly have held some interesting things back in the day. 2. The lock was still in place. No one had gone down there. Not vandals, not looters, no one. This was the only place I could really explore, and where I might find something interesting to photograph or outright steal. I had come to the palace basically with the idea that it would be okay to take whatever I wanted because it was, abandoned. It didn't take much effort to break the lock. Well, actually, it didn't. What didn't take much effort was breaking the metal plate to which the lock was attached. Time and deterioration had done most of the work for me, and I was able to bend the metal plate enough to remove the screws from the wall, something that apparently no one else had thought of, or hadn't been able to do at the time. The character-only area was a surprising and very welcome change from the rest of the building I'd seen. For starters, 1 or 3 of the fluorescent lights overhead were working, although they flickered and dimmed sporadically. Plus, nothing had been stolen or broken, although time and exposure to the elements were taking their toll. There were tables with notepads and pens, there were clocks, even a time clock on the wall with punched cards and everything. Chairs were scattered around, and there was even a small break room with an old television showing static and long-rotten food and drinks on the counters. It was like one of those post-apocalyptic movies where everything remains as it was at the time of the evacuation. As I walked through the labyrinthine underground corridors of the character-only area, things only got more and more interesting. Moving forward, I saw overturned desks and tables, papers scattered and almost fused with the damp floor, and a large carpet of mold that was slowly taking over the truly rotting crimson tapestry. Everything was rather soft. Anything made of wood would disintegrate when even the slightest force was applied, and items of clothing hanging on hooks in one of the rooms would simply crumble into damp threads if I tried to take them down. One thing that bothered me was that the light became increasingly scarce and unreliable the deeper I went into the cold, damp, and stifling depths of the place. Finally, I came to a black and yellow striped door with the words, "Character Prep 1, stenciled on it. The door wouldn't open at first. I assumed that was probably where the costumes were kept, and I definitely wanted a picture of that twisted, stinking mess. No matter how hard I tried from various angles and with various tricks, the door wouldn't budge. At least, until I gave up and started walking away. That's when there was a soft click and the door slowly creaked open. Inside, the room was pitch black. I used the camera's flash to search for a light switch on the wall next to the door, but there was nothing. As I searched, a loud electric buzz cut my enthusiasm short. Rows of lights on the ceiling suddenly lit up, flickering and dimming intermittently like the ones I'd already passed. It took my eyes a second to adjust, and it seemed like the light would get brighter and brighter until all the bulbs exploded. But just when I thought I was going to reach that critical moment, the lights dimmed a little and stabilized. The room was exactly as I had imagined. Several Disney costumes hung on the walls, completely assembled like strange cartoon corpses hanging from invisible gallows. There was a whole rack of loincloths and native clothing on hangers in the back. What struck me as odd, and what I wanted to photograph immediately, was a Mickey Mouse costume in the center of the room. Unlike the other costumes, this one was lying on its back in the middle of the floor like a murder victim. The costume's skin was rotten, and part of it had fallen off, leaving bare patches. What was even stranger, however, was the color of the costume. It was like a photographic negative of the real Mickey Mouse. Black where it should have been white, and white where it should have been black. His normally red jumpsuit was sky blue. It looked so nasty that I decided not to photograph that thing until the end. I took a photograph of the costumes hanging on the walls. Upward angles, downward angles, sideways to show a whole row of frozen, putrid cartoon faces, some with their plastic eyes missing. So I decided to stage a scene. Just one of the characters' scruffy heads, on the slippery, dirty floor. I grabbed the head of the Donald Duck costume and carefully pulled it apart so it wouldn't fall apart in my hands. As I stared into the rotting head's wide-eyed face, a loud crashing sound made me jump in fright. I looked down at my feet, and there between my shoes was a human skull. It had fallen from the figure's head and shattered at my feet, only the empty face and lower jaw remained, staring back at me. I dropped the duck's head immediately, as you might imagine, and moved toward the door. Standing in the doorway, I looked back at the skull on the floor. I had to take a picture of it, you know? I had to, for a number of reasons that may sound silly, but only if you don't think about it carefully. I was going to need proof of what happened, especially if Disney was somehow going to make it all go away. There was no doubt in my mind, from the beginning, that even if it was just gross negligence, Disney was responsible for this. That's when Mickey, the photographic negative, the Mickey opposite in the middle of the floor, began to rise. First sitting down, then standing up, the Mickey Mouse costume, or whoever was inside it, stood in the center of the room, its fake face staring back at me as I stammered, "No." Over and over and over. With hands shaking, heart pounding wildly, and legs that once again felt like jelly, I managed to raise the camera and point it at the creature that was currently silently examining me. The digital camera screen showed only dead pixels in the thing's shape. It was a perfect silhouette of Mickey's costume. As the camera moved in my unsteady hands, the pixels spread across the screen, marring it wherever Mickey's outline moved. Then the camera died. It went black and silent, ruined. I raised my eyes once more to the Mickey Mouse costume. "Hey," he said in a low, perverted, but perfectly realized Mickey Mouse voice, "do you want to see me take my head off?" He began to pull at his own head, his clumsy gloved fingers wrapping around his neck in impatient, scratching motions, similar to those of a wounded man trying to wriggle free from the jaws of a predator. As he sank his fingers into her neck. So much blood. So much thick, lumpy, yellowish blood. I turned around, hearing a chilling ripping of cloth and flesh. All I cared about was getting out of there. Over the threshold of the room, I saw the last message scratched into the metal by bone or nails. Abandoned by God. I never took the photos from my camera. I never wrote the blog post about it. After running away from the place, saving my sanity and probably my life, I learned why Disney didn't want anyone to know about this place. They didn't want anyone like me to come in. They didn't want anything like that to come out. Well then, ladies and gentlemen. This abandoned by Disney. A shout out to SlimeBeast, the author of the Creepypasta, itself. I hope you all enjoy this and there'll be more in the future. Until then, take care and I see you all next time. Thanks for watching.